Today I'm going to tell you about the beheading of Jean Livingston at the bottom of the Royal Mile here in Edinburgh. So where am I today? Well, I'm stood here. There's the Scottish Parliament building there, and over there we have the Palace of Holyrood House, and this is the bottom of the Royal Mile, the Canongate. Now the Canongate used to be a separate borough from Edinburgh. It was outside the city walls. But what we're looking at here is this stone circle on the road here. See that circle of grey bricks? That is where the Girth Cross used to stand. The Girth Cross was a place of public proclamations, announcements and executions. And it was here on this site in 1600 that a lady called Jean Livingston was beheaded for the murder of her husband John Kincaid. So let's talk a wee bit about Jean Livingston. She was a young woman who married John Kincaid, and she got the title of Lady Warriston through this marriage, and they both lived at the Warriston estate here in Edinburgh, which I believe would have been where the new town is today. It was not a happy marriage. He was much older than her. Apparently he was quite abusive and mistreated her. So Jean Livingston confided in her nurse, a lady called Janet Murdo, and told her about the abuse and stuff, and the two of them hatched this plan to get rid of the husband John Kincaid by having him murdered. Now they weren't going to commit the murder themselves, they needed someone else to do it for them. So they enlisted the help of a young servant from the house, a man called Robert Weir. And they paid Robert Weir to murder John Kincaid. Now this was the plan. The two women would let him into the house on the night of the 2nd of July through the cellars, and Robert Weir would go up the stairs into the bedroom and surprise John Kincaid in his sleep and strangle him to death. But that didn't work out too well, because as Robert Weir went up the stairs to the bedroom, he made quite a lot of noise. So by the time he opened the bedroom door, John Kincaid's sitting up in the bed wide awake, and the two men leap at each other and have a brutal fight. There's a huge amount of noise and commotion, and Robert Weir ends up having to beat John Kincaid to death to kill him. Now this was not the plan at all. This had gone seriously wrong, so Robert Weir fled the scene, and the two women were arrested and sentenced to death for the murder of John Kincaid. Now they were both sentenced to death by burning, but Jean Livingston was from a noble family, so they changed her execution to beheading on the Maiden. Now we must talk a wee bit about the Maiden. You've heard of the guillotine, of course, from France. The Maiden was Scotland's version of the guillotine, and it was used in Scotland from the 1560s till about 1710. It was introduced by a man called James Douglas, who was the 4th Earl of Morton, and he himself ended up being killed in the Maiden for his part in the plot to murder Lord Darnley. And over the course of its use, it killed about 150 people, this beheading device, the Maiden. And the good thing about the Maiden was it was flat pack, so it could be dismantled, moved somewhere else and set up for a bit of variety in your executions. But it was brought here, and it was set up here at 4 o'clock in the morning on the 5th of July 1600, and this is where Jean Livingston was beheaded. Now the reason they did it, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, is because they didn't want a huge crowd, a big mob to gather here and shout and stuff, because this was the execution of a noble person. So they wanted to keep it a wee bit hush-hush. But apart from that, besides that, a huge crowd did turn up here, and they witnessed the beheading of Jean Livingston. Now at the exact same time, at the top of this hill up here, the nurse, Janet Murdo, she was burnt alive for her part in the murder. So the two women were killed simultaneously, one burned alive up there and the other beheaded down here. But what about the servant, Robert Weir, the one that actually committed the murder? Well, it took them 4 years to track him down, and he was killed in 1604 up at the Market Cross in the middle of the Royal Mile. Now his execution was particularly gruesome. He was broken on the wheel. Now if you were broken on the wheel, this meant they had a big cart wheel and you'd be strapped to the wheel, and the executioner had an iron bar which he would use to break your limbs through the gaps in the spokes of the wheel. So a very brutal and very agonising way to die. And once the executioner had decided you'd suffered enough, they used a blade from a plough to cut Robert Weir's head off, and his remains were displayed at Warriston near the scene of the crime. So that's 3 grisly executions that happened on this street connected to the same murder. But next time you're in this area wandering around, have a look down and spot the stone circle here where Jean Livingston lost her head in the year 1600.